The royal palace of Zinthra hung, suspended above the storm-racked clouds of the gas giant Vorthis, its spires of crystalline alloy catching the fractured light of twin suns, each tower humming with the low, resonant frequency of ancient alien technology. Inside the hall of echoing thrones, where the air shimmered with suspended particles of luminescent dust and the walls breathed slow, rhythmic pulses of sapphire light, Queen Nyxera of the Vorthian dominion sat in silence. Her skin, a deep luminous indigo, gleamed like polished obsidian under the ceiling's soft glow, and her hair, long, flowing, and the color of glacial ice, fell in waves that seemed to ripple even when no wind stirred. She had not smiled in 17 cycles. Not since the last suitor, a noble from the Orion clans, had dared to touch her ceremonial crown during the trial of reverence and been vaporized by her uncontrolled psychic surge. 12 suitors had come before him. 12 had fled. 11 had died. And now, the Council of 9 had sent one final candidate, a human, a species deemed primitive, fragile, and emotionally unstable by Vorthian records. His name was Torin Vey. He was not a warrior, not a diplomat, not even a noble. He was an exobiologist from a backwater colony called Eridani 7, sent here because he was the only one who had survived the quarantine zone after the Vorthian bioscout ship crashed on his world. He had tended to the wounded alien crew with quiet hands and no fear. He had spoken to their dying queen in broken pidgin and held her hand until her last breath. And for that, they had brought him here to be judged. Torin stood at the center of the hall, his human frame dwarfed by the towering arches, his earth-worn uniform, stained with dirt from the shuttle landing and frayed at the cuffs, clashing violently with the opulence around him. He had no weapons, no armor, no ceremonial robes, just a small, worn datapad in his pocket containing the last message from his daughter, Lyra. "Daddy, when are you coming home? I drew you a spaceship with wings like a dragon." He had not told her he might not return. He had not told anyone he was afraid, not because of the Queen's reputation, but because he remembered the way his wife's eyes had dimmed the day they told him she wouldn't survive the birthing. He knew what loss felt like, and he knew somehow that this queen, this towering, radiant, furious being, was drowning in the same ocean. The council had given him one rule: do not speak unless spoken to, do not touch, do not flinch. They had not told him the second rule, the one whispered among the palace servants in the lower corridors, that the queen's rage was not born of cruelty, but of grief. Her daughter, Princess Silra, had vanished 5 cycles ago during the eclipse of shattered stars. The last transmission from her shuttle showed her laughing, her blue hair swirling like liquid light as she waved from the viewport, calling out to her mother in a voice full of joy. Then silence. No distress signal. No debris. No body. Just emptiness. And since then, Nyxera had refused to speak to anyone. Her emotions, once as controlled as a star's orbit, had spiraled into a tempest that shattered crystal, melted alloy, and turned suitors into ash. The only thing that had kept her alive was the ancient Vorthian ritual, the trial of stillness, where a suitor must sit in her presence for 7 full days without moving, without blinking, without breathing a single word. None had lasted more than 2. Torin sat on the stone bench across from her throne, his hands folded in his lap, his eyes fixed on the floor. He did not look at her. He did not need to. He could feel her, like a storm gathering just beyond the horizon. The air grew thick. The dust in the hall began to swirl in tight, angry spirals. A chandelier above them cracked, then shattered, raining shards of glowing crystal that dissolved before they touched the ground. Torin did not move. He breathed slowly. In. He thought of Lyra's drawing. He thought of his wife's last whisper. "Be gentle with her, Torin, even when she screams." He thought of how, in the silence of the shuttle's medbay, he had held the dying Vorthian queen's hand and realized she had been afraid too. On the 3rd day, a servant brought him water. He drank it without looking up. On the 4th day, the queen's fingers twitched. A single tear escaped, slow, glowing, and impossibly blue, and fell onto the marble floor, where it hissed and left behind a tiny, perfect flower made of frozen light. Torin saw it. He did not react. He did not blink. On the 5th day, the palace trembled. A section of the eastern wing collapsed inward as Nyxera's sorrow erupted in a silent scream that shattered every mirror in the palace. Torin remained seated. His neck ached. His back burned. His eyes stung. He did not move. On the 6th day, she spoke. "Why do you not fear me?" Her voice was not loud. It did not shake the walls, but it cut through the silence like a scalpel. Torin finally lifted his gaze. "I do," he said simply. The queen stiffened. No one had answered. No one had ever answered. "I am afraid," he continued, his voice quiet, rough with exhaustion, "that if I look away, you will forget how to be gentle again." A beat, then another. The air stilled. The dust settled. The flower on the floor pulsed once, softly. "You are not like the others," she murmured. "No," he said. "I'm not." She rose then, not with fury, but with something heavier, something broken. She descended the steps of her throne, each movement deliberate, her bare feet whispering against the cold stone. She stopped before him. He did not rise. He did not bow. He simply looked up, into eyes that had not seen kindness in 17 cycles. "You are not here to win me," she said. "No," he said. "I'm here because I think you're lonely." She reached out, not to strike, not to burn, but to touch his face. Her fingers were cool. Her skin glowed faintly where they met his. He did not flinch. "I have killed 12, she whispered. "I know," he said. "Why do you stay?" "Because I think you're trying to remember how to love," he replied. "And I think I know how to help you." She did not speak for a long time. Then, slowly, she sat beside him on the bench. Not on the throne. Not above him. Beside him, like an equal. And for the first time in 17 cycles, the palace breathed. The days that followed were not peaceful. They were tender, awkward, beautiful. Torin learned that Nyxora's power was not rage. It was memory. Every surge, every explosion, every shattered wall, was a memory of her daughter's laughter echoing in the empty halls. Silra had been wild, brilliant, fearless. She had painted the walls of her chambers with bioluminescent algae that changed color with her mood. She had stolen the royal chime of harmonic resonance and played it backward, just to see if the palace would sing a different song. She had once convinced her mother to let her pilot a shuttle through the asteroid belt of Krylos, just to prove she could. And she had done it, and returned with a necklace made of space dust crystals and a grin that lit up the entire quadrant. Nyxora had never let her go. Torin began to speak to her, not as a suitor, not as a subject, but as someone who understood loss. He told her about Lyra, about how she would hum the same tune every night before sleep, a melody she'd invented herself, about how she drew pictures of her father holding hands with aliens, always with big smiles and hearts above their heads, about how, on her 5th birthday, she had made him a crown out of cardboard and glitter and declared him king of the universe. Nyxora listened, and for the first time she did not cry. Instead, she took him to the Chamber of Echoes, a hidden vault beneath the palace where the last recorded voice of Princess Silra still played on a loop, preserved by an ancient Vorthian artifact that captured emotion as much as sound. They sat together in the dark, listening to the girl's voice, bright and full of life. "Mommy, look at the nebula. It's dancing. Can we go closer? Please? Just a little? I promise I won't touch the gravity well." Torin wiped his eyes. Nyxora did not, but her hand found his, and held it. The council demanded results. The Vorthian people grew restless. The nobles whispered that the human was a curse, a contaminant, a weakness. They sent assassins, not to kill Torin, but to frighten him. They sent a creature known as the Hollow King, a rogue bioengineered predator forged from the remains of fallen Vorthian warriors, its body stitched together with stolen neural threads, its eyes glowing with the stolen memories of 1,000 dead kings. It came at midnight, through the ventilation shafts, silent as a shadow, its claws dripping with neurotoxin that dissolved bone. Torin was asleep in the guest chambers, curled beside Nyxora on a low, cushioned dais. She had not asked him to leave. He had not asked to stay. The Hollow King breached the door. It moved like liquid smoke, its form shifting between shapes. Sometimes a man, sometimes a beast, sometimes a writhing mass of screaming faces pulled from the minds of its victims. It lunged for Torin. Nyxora woke. She did not scream. She did not rage. She rose, and for the first time in her life, she chose love over grief. She stepped between Torin and the monster, and she sang. Not a war cry, not a command, a lullaby, the same one Silra had sung to her stuffed space horse every night. The Hollow King froze, his jagged edges softened, the screaming faces in its body stilled. One by one they turned toward her, and smiled. Then, gently, they dissolved into light. The creature collapsed into a pile of ash and glowing threads, the last of its stolen memories fading like stars at dawn. Nyxora turned. Torin was awake. He He sat up slowly, rubbing his eyes. You sang, he said. She nodded. I remembered how. He reached for her hand. She let him take it. The palace began to heal. The shattered walls mended themselves as the ancient architecture responded to her restored emotional balance. The lights returned to their natural rhythm. The flowers that grew where her tears had fallen bloomed into full, glowing vines that curled around the corridors like living tapestries. The servants, once afraid to enter the queen's wing, began to bring her tea in the morning. They brought Torin breakfast too. And sometimes they brought Lyra's drawing, translated into Vorthian glyphs by the palace linguists, and hung it on the wall beside Nyxera's throne. The queen began to laugh. Not the brittle, broken sound of her earlier days, but a full, rich, echoing sound that made the crystal chandeliers tremble with joy. She took Torin to the sky gardens, where floating islands drifted above the clouds, tethered by magnetic roots. She showed him the waterfall that flowed upward, defying gravity because it was made of liquid starlight. She let him touch the vines that sang when brushed by wind. She let him ride the back of a sky whale, a gentle, massive creature that glided through the clouds like a living cathedral, its skin shimmering with constellations only the Vorthians could see. And one night, as they sat on the highest ledge, watching the twin suns dip below the horizon and the first stars of the Vorthian night blink awake, she turned to him. Her face was soft. Her eyes, once cold as frozen nebulae, now held the warmth of 1,000 sunrises. She reached out and brushed a strand of his hair from his forehead. You have no crown, she said. I don't need one, he replied. You have no kingdom. I have a daughter. She looked at him for a long time. Then she smiled, a real, unguarded, radiant smile that made the stars above them flicker in response. Then, she whispered, her voice so quiet it could only be heard by the heart. Will you be my children's father, human? Torin froze, not from fear, not from shock, but from the sheer, overwhelming weight of a question he had never dared to imagine. He thought of Lyra, of her drawings, of her humming, of the way she called him king of the universe every morning. He thought of Nyxera, of her tears, her rage, her songs, her quiet courage. He thought of a child who would have blue skin and silver blue hair and a laugh that could shake the stars. He thought of a home, not on Eridani 7, not on Zinthra, but somewhere in between. He looked into her eyes, and for the first time he let himself hope. He began, his voice thick. I don't know if I'm brave enough. She leaned forward, her forehead touching his. You already saved me, she whispered. He closed his eyes. I'd be honored, he said. And then, for the first time in 17 cycles, the Queen of Zinthra wept. Not from grief, but from joy. And the palace, in its ancient, sentient way, began to sing. The council was furious. They convened in the Hall of Whispers, where the walls absorbed sound and only the most sacred decisions were made. They demanded an explanation. They called for his exile. They invoked the law of bloodline purity, the ancient decree that forbade any non-Vorthian from breeding with the royal line. Nyxera did not argue. She did not threaten. She did not rage. She simply walked into the chamber, holding Torin's hand, and she held up a small, glowing orb. It was the seed of the first queen, the sacred relic that had birthed the Vorthian bloodline 10,000 years ago. It had not glowed in centuries. Now, it pulsed with a soft, golden light, and inside it, faint but unmistakable, was the shape of two hearts, linked. One blue, one human. The council fell silent. The high priest, an ancient being whose skin was woven from starlight and memory, stepped forward. He placed his hand on the orb, and whispered, The first queen. She chose love over lineage. She said, A throne is not made of stone. It is made of who dares to sit beside you. He looked at Torin, then at Nyxera, then at the seed, and he bowed, not to the queen, to them, together. The palace began preparations, not for a wedding, not for a coronation, but for a beginning. They built a nursery in the highest tower, where the sky was closest to the stars. They wove the walls from living crystal that changed color with the child's mood. They planted vines that grew into musical chimes when touched by tiny fingers. They summoned the sky whales to sing lullabies outside the windows. Torin learned to speak Vorthian, not perfectly, but with affection. He learned how to braid Nyxera's hair with strands of glowing thread that changed hue with her emotions. He learned how to cook Vorthian stews that tasted like starlight and cinnamon. He learned how to hold her when the nightmares came, when the silence of the palace reminded her of the day Silra disappeared. And Nixra learned to hold him too. When he woke in the night, trembling, haunted by memories of his wife's final breath. When he stared at the stars and wondered if Lyra was safe. When he whispered her name into the dark. She would press her forehead to his and sing. And he would sleep. The first signs came on the night of the celestial convergence. A rare alignment of 3 moons that bathed Zinthra in a single unbroken beam of silver light. Nixra had been resting in the sky garden, her head in Torin's lap as he read her a story from Lyra's favorite Earth book, The Little Prince. She had laughed when the prince said, "It is only with the heart that one can see rightly." That night she dreamed. She dreamed of Silra, not as she was when she vanished, but as she would have been, grown, strong, radiant, with Torin's eyes and her mother's hair. And in the dream Silra reached out, and held her hand, and whispered, "I'm proud of you, Mommy." Nixra woke with a gasp. Her skin glowed, her hair shimmered, and Torin, half asleep beside her, felt it, the warmth, the pulse, the miracle. She turned to him, her eyes wide with wonder. I feel her," she breathed. He sat up. "Who?" "My daughter." He didn't understand. Not yet, but he held her, and together they waited. The pregnancy was unlike anything the Vorthians had ever recorded. It did not follow the usual 9-cycle gestation. It followed emotion. When Nixra was afraid, the child grew quiet. When she laughed, the walls of the nursery glowed brighter. When Torin sang Lyra's lullaby to her at night, the baby kicked hard, like a tiny star exploding in her womb. The palace healers were baffled. The council was terrified. The scientists ran endless scans, but the child's energy signature defied all known biology. It was neither fully Vorthian nor fully human. It was something new, something beautiful, something that made the ancient star machines in the palace hum in recognition. On the 5th month, Nixra began to dream of other children. Not just one, 3. A girl with her mother's hair and her father's stubborn grin. A boy who could make flowers bloom just by touching them. And another, smaller, quieter, who sang in a voice no one else could hear, but who made the stars pause when they listened. She told Torin. He smiled. "I think," he said, "we're going to be very busy." She laughed, and for the first time in her life, she did not feel alone. The Vorthians began to change. The nobles who once whispered of contamination now brought gifts to the nursery. Hand-carved stars, glowing seeds, songs written in ancient tongues. The servants, once afraid to speak to the queen, now brought her tea with honey from the sky bees, who had learned to dance in the shape of hearts. Even the hollow king's ashes, now preserved in a glass orb on the palace altar, pulsed softly whenever Torin passed by. And the people, ordinary Vorthians, farmers, artists, pilots, began to gather in the lower districts not to protest but to watch, to wait, to hope, because for the first time in generations, their queen was not a force of destruction. She was a mother, and the human who had walked into her palace with nothing but a datapad and a tired heart was becoming their king. One evening, as the twin suns set and the first of the moons rose, Torin sat on the balcony of their chamber, holding Nixra's hand as she rested against him, her belly swollen with wonder. She was quiet, too quiet. He looked at her. Her eyes were closed. Her breathing was slow, but her skin, it was glowing. Not with anger, not with sorrow, but with light, like a star about to be born. He kissed her forehead. "Are you okay?" She opened her eyes. They were full of tears. "I think," she whispered, "it's almost time." He didn't ask what she meant. He just held her tighter. And when the first cry echoed through the palace, high, clear, and filled with the music of 1,000 stars, he knew. It wasn't just a child. It was a promise, a bridge, a new beginning. And as the palace erupted in song, vibrating with joy, with awe, with love, he looked down at the tiny, glowing form wrapped in silken cloth, her skin a perfect blend of indigo and human warmth, her hair already curling in soft, silver-blue waves, her eyes wide, bright, and impossibly familiar. Staring up at him, she reached out and grasped his finger with the strength of a newborn star, and smiled, not like a Vorthian, not like a human, like something new, like family. And Nixra, her voice trembling with joy, whispered into the night, "We have a daughter." Torin looked at her, then at the child, then at the stars, and he whispered back, "She's perfect." And for the first time in his life, he was home. But the galaxy, as it always does, had more to say. Deep in the void beyond Zinthra's orbit, a signal pulsed. Old, forgotten, alive. It was a message, encoded in the same frequency as the Vorthian seed. And it carried a single phrase. The first queen she knew. Somewhere, in the dark between the stars, something stirred. Something that had been waiting. Something that remembered. And it was coming. Not to destroy, not to conquer, but to find, to see, to know. If love could truly cross the divide. If a human and an alien could become more than two beings. If they could become a family. And if their child, their brilliant, impossible, star-born daughter, could be the key to a future no one had dared to imagine. Torin did not know it yet, but as he held his daughter for the first time, her tiny fingers curled around his thumb, and Nyxera rested her head on his shoulder, humming the lullaby that had saved them both. He felt it, the universe, breathing, waiting, and smiling, because the story wasn't over. It was just beginning, and the stars were listening. The peace that had bloomed in the royal palace of Zinthra was as radiant as it was fragile. In the weeks following the birth of their daughter, named Lyria, a fusion of Lyra and Silra, Torin and Queen Nyxera settled into a rhythm that felt more like shared breathing than ruling. Lyria's presence had reawakened the palace in ways even the ancient archives had not predicted. The crystalline walls now shimmered with prismatic hues when she laughed. The sky vines coiled gently around her crib, whispering lullabies in a language older than Vorthian speech. Torin, once an outsider with calloused hands and a quiet grief, now carried himself with a grace that surprised even the most skeptical courtiers. He wore no crown, yet the people bowed to him, not out of obligation but affection. But beyond the palace's luminous veil, shadows stirred. It began with silence. The Outer Rim colonies, once loyal vassals of the Vorthian dominion, stopped answering hails. Their trade convoys vanished without distress calls. Then came the wreckage, not scorched by plasma fire, not torn by gravity shears, but hollowed out from within, their hulls intact but emptied of crew, cargo, and even organic matter. Only faint traces of a strange, bioluminescent residue remained, blue, the same shade as Nyxera's skin. Torin recognized it instantly. He had seen it before on his home colony Eridani 7, in the wreckage of the crashed Vorthian scout ship that had first brought him to this fate. Back then, the residue was dismissed as an atmospheric reaction. Now, staring at the spectral analysis glowing on the palace's central hollow panel, his blood ran cold. "It's replicating," he said, voice low. Nyxera stood beside him, arms crossed, her eyes narrowed. The glow in her skin dimmed slightly, a sign of unease, not fear. "What do you mean?" "This compound, it's not just residue. It's a biological agent, a hive signal. It consumes organic life and reassembles it." He paused, glancing at their sleeping daughter through the nursery viewport. "It's turning people into something else." Before Nyxera could respond, the royal advisor, a spindly elder named Vexel, burst into the chamber, his usual composure shattered. "Your Majesty," he gasped, antennae quivering. "The Temple of First Memory. It's gone." They arrived within minutes, Lyria secured in a biosling against Torin's chest. Where the sacred temple had once floated serenely above Lake Zara, only a hollow sphere of obsidian remained, perfectly smooth, utterly silent. No debris, no bodies, just a black orb humming with suppressed energy. Nyxera approached it, palm outstretched. The moment her skin neared the surface, the orb split open like a pupil dilating. Inside hung a single crystalline shard, identical to the seed of the first queen, but darker, corrupted, and etched into its surface, in a script that hadn't been used since the founding wars, were 3 words: "She is returning." Nyxera staggered back as if struck. "Silra?" Torin whispered. "No," Nyxera breathed, her voice trembling with dread. "Not Silra." She turned to him, eyes wide with realization. Silra never vanished. She was taken. The truth unfolded like a nightmare given form. Centuries ago, the first queen hadn't just founded the Vorthian dominion. She had imprisoned her twin sister, Zalthea, a being of pure biosentience who believed love was weakness and empathy a flaw to be purged. Zalthea had sought to merge all life into a single emotionless hive, a perfect organism. The first queen had sealed her away in the void between realities, using the seed as both key and lock. But the seed had weakened, and something, perhaps Silra's disappearance, Perhaps Torin's arrival had cracked it open. Now Zalthea was returning, and she was using Silra's genetic echo, the very memory of her laughter, her scent, her voice as a lure. She doesn't want to destroy us, Nyxera realized, voice raw. She wants to replace us, turn us into her children. A new hive, led by a queen born of human and Vorthian, Lyria. Torin clutched his daughter tighter. That night, the nursery skyvines ceased singing. The next morning, the sky whales fell silent. By dusk, the palace's healing glow began to flicker. Worse, Lyria stopped crying. She simply lay in her cradle, eyes wide open, unblinking, watching something only she could see. Torin tried to soothe her. Nyxera sang every lullaby she knew. Nothing worked. Then, in the dead of night, Lyria spoke. Not in Vorthian, not in human words, but in a voice that was both and neither. She calls me sister. The words echoed through the chamber like a chime made of ice. Nyxera collapsed to her knees. Torin activated the palace's emergency lockdown, but it was too late. Zalthea had already breached the boundary, not through force but through memory. She was in the dreams of every Vorthian within 100 light-years. And she was whispering, "You do not need pain. You do not need choice. You only need to be whole." One by one, the palace guards began to walk toward the obsidian sphere on the lake. Their eyes glowing blue, their movements synchronized, their voices humming the same hollow note. Torin knew they couldn't fight this with weapons. This was a war of identity, of love versus unity, of messy, chaotic, beautiful individuality against flawless, silent perfection. He turned to Nyxera. "We have to go back," he said. "To the void." "Yes, but no one returns from there." "Then we won't come back as we are," he said, eyes blazing. "We'll come back as something stronger." They prepared in secret. Using the corrupted shard, Torin devised a resonance bridge, a crude device cobbled from palace tech and his own human intuition. It wouldn't open a portal. It would mirror one. To enter the void, they'd have to let Zalthea's signal pull them in. It would feel like death. It might be, but as Lyria reached up and touched his tear-streaked cheek with a tiny, glowing hand, Torin knew there was no other choice. He kissed Nyxera, then he kissed his daughter, and together, they stepped into the obsidian sphere. The world dissolved, not into darkness, but into silence, a silence so complete it screamed. They floated in a void where time had no meaning, surrounded by faces, millions of them, frozen in serene, empty bliss. Among them, Torin saw Silra. She was beautiful, ethereal. Her blue hair drifted like smoke. But her eyes held no joy, no fear, no anything. "Silra," Nyxera cried. The girl turned, smiled. "Mother, you are weary. Lay down your pain. Join us." "No," Nyxera sobbed. "That's not you." "It is," Silra replied gently. "I am whole now. You can be too." Behind her, the void rippled, and Zalthea emerged, not as a monster, but as Nyxera only perfected. Flawless. Her skin shimmered like liquid starlight. Her voice was a chorus of 1,000 harmonized souls. "You loved your daughter too much," Zalthea said. "You mourned her like a wound. I gave her peace. Now give me your new child. She will rule a galaxy without sorrow." Torin stepped forward. "You call that peace?" he said, voice steady. "It's erasure. It is evolution." "No," he said. "Evolution keeps the scars. It learns from them. You're not evolving life. You're deleting it." Zalthea tilted her head, curious. "You are fragile, temporary. Why cling to such fragility?" "Because," Torin said, pulling Nyxera close, "it's what makes love real." Then he did the one thing no Vorthian would dare. He began to cry, not silently, not with dignity, but openly, ugly, human, shuddering sobs that echoed in the dead space. And something happened. The faces around them flickered. Silra's hand twitched. A single tear, blue, glowing, slid down her cheek. Zalthea recoiled as if burned. "Impossible. Grief is inefficiency. It has no function." "It has every function," Nyxera said, stepping forward, her own tears falling like liquid stars. "It means we loved enough to lose, and that love is worth the pain." She reached out not to strike, but to embrace her daughter. Silra hesitated, then leaned in. The moment their skin touched, the void trembled. Light erupted not from outside, but from within the faces themselves. One by one they remembered. A mother's voice, a first kiss, a failed invention, a song sung off-key, a child's laugh, imperfections, regrets, joys, and they screamed, not in pain, but in remembrance. Zalthea shrieked, her perfect form fracturing like glass. You poison the whole with your weakness. No, Torin said, holding up the resonance bridge. We heal it. He activated it, not as a weapon, but as a mirror. And in that mirror Zalthea saw herself, not as perfection, but as loneliness. For the first time in eons she felt it. Alone, not whole, missing. She let out a wail that shook the fabric of reality, and collapsed inward, not destroyed, but transformed, into a seed, small, quiet, waiting. The void began to dissolve. Torin grabbed Nyxera's hand. Silra, now glowing with her own inner light, took the other, and they fell not down but home. They awoke on the palace floor. Sunlight streamed through the windows. The skyvines sang. Lyria cooed in her cradle, reaching for them with a grin. Silra stood beside them, real warm, alive. I remember everything, she whispered, tears in her eyes. Even the silence. Nyxera pulled her into a crushing embrace. Torin watched them, heart full. But as he turned, he saw it. The obsidian sphere was gone. In its place stood a single tree. Its bark was silver. Its leaves glowed faintly blue. And at its base, nestled in the roots, was the seed. Zalthea's seed. Waiting. Not for conquest, but for a gardener. Torin smiled. He knew what came next. Because the story wasn't over. It never would be. And somewhere far beyond the twin suns, in the quiet dark between galaxies, a new signal pulsed. Not of control, but of curiosity. Tell me, it seemed to whisper, what is love? And Torin, holding his family beneath the singing vines, knew they would have to show it. Not with force, but with time, with tears, with tiny hands that reached for the stars, and hearts brave enough to break and mend again and again. The tree grew, not tall, not grand, but steady, alive, humming with quiet light. Its silver bark pulsed gently each time Lyria laughed, and its blue leaves shimmered when Nyxera sang. Silra tended to it daily, whispering stories to its roots, of her time in the void, of her mother's grief, of the human who taught her that pain could be sacred. Torin never wore a crown. But when the Vorthian people gathered beneath the tree on the day of unbroken light, they wove one from living vines and starlight petals, and placed it upon his head, not by decree, but by choice. He knelt, and Nyxera, in a gown woven from the tears of 1,000 healed hearts, knelt beside him. I do not ask for your throne, he said, voice thick with wonder. I only ask to stay. Nyxera pressed her forehead to his. You never left. They were married beneath the tree, not by priest or law, but by the singing of the sky whales, the glow of the palace walls, and the first step Lyria took. Toward them, barefoot and glowing, her tiny hand finding both theirs at once. The council bowed. The nobles wept. The people sang, not in unison, but in harmony, each voice unique, each note imperfect, each one true. Lyria grew. She spoke in 3 languages before her first birthday. She made flowers bloom with a touch. She drew pictures of her parents holding hands with Zalthea, now a quiet spirit who dwelled in the tree's roots, no longer a force of silence, but a guardian of stillness. Silra became the keeper of memory, traveling the stars to find lost souls, helping them remember what it meant to feel. Nyxera ruled not with fury, but with grace. Her laughter became the sound of peace. Her tears, once feared, were now collected in crystal vials and given to grieving families as symbols of hope. Torin taught children on Eridani 7 to speak Vorthian. He wrote books, not of science, but of love. How to hold someone who's hurting, why crying makes you stronger, the day my daughter made the stars sing. They had 2 more children, a boy who could calm storms with a lullaby, and another girl who spoke to the trees and remembered every dream she ever had. Zalthea never spoke again, but sometimes, when the moon was full, the tree would bloom with silver flowers that tasted like forgotten birthdays and first kisses. And if you listened very, very closely, you could hear her voice. Not in words, but in the quiet between heartbeats. Thank you. The galaxy changed. Not because they conquered, but because they chose kindness over control. Love over perfection. Messy, loud, crying, laughing, imperfect love. Centuries later, when the stars themselves began to whisper their tale, Children across 100 worlds would ask their parents, did it really happen? That human and the Blue Queen? And the answer was always the same, yes. And their daughter? She's the reason we still believe in hope. On the day Torin passed, old, surrounded by grandchildren, his hand in Nixera's, the tree bloomed one final time. A single leaf drifted down. It landed on his chest and glowed. Nixera pressed her forehead to his. You were my miracle, she whispered. He smiled. I was just lucky. When the sun rose the next morning, the tree was gone. In its place stood a small stone archway. Carved into it, in Vorthian, human, and Starscript, were 3 words. We were enough. Lyria, now queen of the new harmony, stood before it with her children. She placed her hand on the stone, and the archway hummed. A voice, soft, warm, familiar, echoed from the wind. We still are. And somewhere, in the quiet between the stars, a new child, blue-skinned, with silver-blue hair and human eyes, opened her eyes for the first time, and smiled, because she had been loved. And that was enough. Forever.